Well, hello. We are back again. Gosh, what a cornucopia of goodies we had just now. I'm going to take kind of host prerogative here and just have just a few observations from this morning, and then we can kind of get into it. Just thinking about Roberto's presentation, where he kind of suggested that physics and tobacco science was sort of in lockstep until the purity dissolved and the politics came into the tobacco science. So I'm not asking you necessarily to respond to this. This is just me kind of, riffing slightly. But I did look this up. And in fact, when Galileo suggested, following Copernicus, that the Earth revolved around the sun, he was tried for heresy because it completely upset the Catholic Church, and he spent most of the rest of his life under house arrest. And so it almost feels that people like Constantinos and his experience, and the people who've been smeared and blacklisted and all the rest of it, are at the beginning of the process whereby they are in a minority and they're vulnerable to attack. Galileo's case, it was the Catholic Church. In this case, maybe it's Puritanism, as Michelle was suggesting. But there does seem to be, it may be a bit tenuous, but there does seem to be some kind of connection between between science that is disruptive and the people who are doing the disruption, and the degree to which it conflicts with the orthodox established opinion. The other thing that struck me was the idea of what science gets published and what science gets media coverage. And because my background is in the world of illegal drugs primarily, I often reference this article in The Lancet from 1983, when there was a lot of concern about so-called crack babies, that somehow crack was causing an escalation in the number of infant deaths that would not otherwise have happened. It actually turned out to be that there were so many confounding factors that weren't taken into account, like poverty and deprivation and nutrition. But nevertheless, this study by Coren actually revealed that if you submitted a study about crack babies that was either neutral or suggested there really wasn't that much effect, you stood far lesser chance of being published than other papers that showed there was a correlation, even if their methodology was weaker. So there's a history to that. The other thing, which will lead into my first question to Sarah, is about the industry. I mean, e-cigarettes came onto the market roughly around 2005, 2006, something like that, and spent most of those early years as a niche product, with the information and the products being publicized through the internet, through local producers and early adopter consumers and so on. And I don't think there was even any interest from the major tobacco companies till about 2012, when I think L'Oreal took over. Is it L'Oreal, or is that a perfume? Can't remember.
L'Oreal took over.
L'Oreal, yeah, L'Oreal I think is a perfume. They really weren't interested. But L'Oreal took over a small company, maybe in Blue. They took over Blue. During that period, I think the actual number of papers around tobacco harm reduction and vaping were very small. There was no real scientific interest. It may not have been a coincidence that as soon as the tobacco industry started waking up to the possibility of not being caught out by new products in the way that, say, Kodak were and IBM were about the laptop, they obviously got involved. And it seemed that I think there was a guy from one of the vaping organizations that was talking about trying to separate out the vaping industry and the tobacco industry. And that kind of works unless you've got those kind of products, the good ones and the less good ones, both being produced by the same company, and the possible conflicts that might go in within that company between different departments and different philosophies and all the rest of it. So I'm going to ask you, Sarah, how does that play out in BAT?
Well, it's a good question, Harry. I mean, I think so. When I joined in around 2010, we didn't have any revenue from, well, a tiny bit of revenue from non-combustible products in the form of snus. And the early e-cigarette products were not very good. You know, the sensory delivery, the nicotine delivery wasn't very good. So BAT wasn't particularly interested. But as the technologies began to improve, we did get interested. And like you say, it is very much a disruptive technology. So when we started researching vaping, it was handled separately from the main business because, of course, you have to judge its successes in a different way using different criteria. And it was run separately for quite a while, and it was only integrated into the main business a couple of years ago when it got to a weighty percentage of what our sales are. And if you think about, so this year we have around 13 million users of non-combustible products. We have a goal that by 2050 we'll have, by 2030 we'll have 50 million users of non-combustible products. Those are massive changes. If you think it was sort of hardly anyone in 2010 to 13 million today to 50 million by 2030. And I think that you have to do it carefully. You have to protect that kind of growing business, and you have to judge it differently from the main business because you are disrupting it. You are shifting consumers from cigarettes, which you know are really, really dangerous, to products that are much less safe. But I mean, for the sustainability of BAT's business, that's what we have to do. We have to, it's only right for us to, and for the sustainability of the business, we have to offer consumers a range of less risky products. We have to encourage smokers to try these, scientifically substantiated, reduced risk alternatives.
And interestingly, from what you said, what is the process by which you hope to grow the market in the way that you said? Given, we hear a lot about the direction of travel and the Bloomberg organisations wanting everything banned and stopped and all the rest of it. Are you reasonably confident that you can pull that off, if I can put it like that, despite the regulatory, if the regulatory environment gets more toxic? But on the other hand, of course, we've heard that the FDA and its approach might offer a sort of beacon of light in all of this, which other nations and other health ministries might follow. But BAT are reasonably confident about this.
Yeah, I mean, it is a business, and the whole industry is in the midst of this technologically driven transformation away from cigarettes to less risky, non-combustible products. And science and sustainability are driving that transformation. And when we look at how we're communicating on the science behind these products, I mean, so it's one thing to do the science, but we must get it published, and we must, teach people in where we sell products around the world how to talk about that science with their local stakeholders. And so there's been a huge change in how we approach science communication in terms of the investment and some of the people that have been brought in the last year to make a step change in how we do that. And science and sustainability are are driving that transformation. And that's what we need. Science is key to all of this, science and innovation.
And just before I come to Martin, the other thing which Chris was talking about, Chris Snowden earlier on, was at the same time as you've got this goal for product development and the shift, a bit like the motor car industry really, the shift away from petrol and diesel towards electric cars, where they're still producing petrol cars. So there's a kind of similarity there. About, to some extent, the worsening perception amongst people about smokers, about whether these things are more dangerous or just as dangerous or whatever. Presumably, your ability to cut through that, really, is quite important, that you need to be able to shift the narrative around this so that you can reach, the public health goals that you've got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we just have to hope that the science holds out in the end, because what we need is sensible, evidence-based approaches to these products. And if you think about, I mean, it's a tragedy that there is more and more misunderstanding about vaping year on year amongst smokers. It's crazy that people think that vaping is as dangerous or more dangerous than smoking. It's just crazy.
It is.
You only have to look at the chemistry, the complexity of the aerosol of smoke versus an e-cigarette aerosol. You only have to look at that.
Yeah.
And when we have visitors, so the other thing I would say is if people want to come and see inside a tobacco company, we're very happy to have people come and tour our facility and judge for themselves with their own eyes.
Right.
But I can only hope that the science will prevail in the end.
So, given this problem with perception that we've got amongst the millions of people out there who are still smoking, what do you think the role of consumer advocacy is in trying to shift that narrative? What role can you play? What levers are there to pull? What can you actually do? Which allies do you need? I suppose. What's the architecture of trying to shift this perception that these products are dangerous, or as dangerous, or worse, or whatever, in order to reach these goals that BAT and all the whole vaping industry has got, whether it's related to big tobacco companies or not?
Well, I think consumers in themselves can do that. I mean, Clive often talks about how consumers should tell their stories, because there are so many different stories. Every consumer is different. I'm what's known as an accidental quitter, because as I constantly tell people, I never made a quit attempt in my life. It was just something I tried out e-cigarettes out of interest and slowly gravitated towards them. But on the other hand, you've got some smokers who tried absolutely everything, were desperate to quit. And then they found e-cigarettes, and they managed finally to switch onto something safer. And all of these stories in their own right are good examples of why public health should look seriously at safer products as something for the future. So just the body of vapers themselves. I mean, I must give a shout out to some of the people that are on social media, which it often baffles public health figures on Twitter and places like that when you get vociferous opposition to any bad news from vapers, and they seem to almost just assume that these vapers must be paid by someone, because they can't imagine doing anything themselves that isn't paid, presumably. I don't know, but it's because, as someone explained it to me once, vapers were smokers and they were hammered as smokers, and then they've found vaping, they've done what they're supposed to do, they've quit smoking, and now here they are being beaten up all over again.
Right.
And that's where their energy comes from, and that's where you have people on Twitter or on Facebook who say I'm an arc welder and I'm a vapor. They identify as a vapor because they feel it's something important to their life. And so really, consumers have just got to keep engaged, listen to groups like ours, NNA, ETHRA, INCO, and just take your lead from them. And if there's something that they want you to do, in America, CASAR often do calls to action and mobilise vapers. Just listen out for those and get involved.
Right.
One last thing, this is especially to people in the UK, and I constantly say this: we're not out of the woods just because we're in the UK and we're not in Europe anymore. No. There are still threats around, so you've got to keep your eyes out all the time, because these things can come to bite you. So no matter how much we think we're out of Europe, the EU can do what it likes, and there's no threat. Right. There is a threat. Governments can be swayed by what's going on elsewhere. So just keep your guard up, basically.
I mean, one thing that strikes me as quite astonishing, really, in terms of the EU TPD and around advertising, that apparently Philip Morris, BAT, whoever they are, cannot put a note inside their own packets, which is about as targeted as advertising as you could possibly get, suggesting to somebody who breaks open that packet that maybe you should think about switching to an e-cigarette. I mean, that just seems to me absurd and bizarre, that they're not allowed to do that. I mean, do you think that irrespective of what the EU TPD review comes up with, I mean, is that something that NNA, one of the things you would like to see change that you could, and that would help you break out of this, what could be seen as a kind of social bubble, really, that you're sort of, what's the word, energizing each other, but not necessarily, or is there a kind of, I mean, do you find within the advocacy consumer group that your members and people like that will try and encourage others to switch?
They do, yeah, a lot of them do. I mean, Andy Morrison, who used to be one of our trustees, he's not anymore, but he's still doing his stuff up in Glasgow. I spoke to him a few weeks ago, and he got himself some kit given to him by an independent company, and he sees homeless people when he sees them smoking, he goes up and gives them an e-cigarette.
Yeah.
You know, he's still doing that, even though it's, you know, it's not his job. It's just something he feels passionate about. So there is a lot of that. Regards to your point about the inserts in packs, we've written to the Department of Health in the UK and to Number 10, and one of our policy proposals now that we've left the EU is exactly that there should be it should be allowed or even mandated of companies to say you have to put these things into cigarette packets, saying, have you tried an e-cigarette or have you tried a safer nicotine product? You know, so that's one of many proposals we put to them, and we hope they look on it. Now we can do that. Now we're outside of the EU, but yeah.
I was just the other thing that crossed my mind. I'm going to ask both of you in a minute what you've picked up from the mornings, so it's not just me, you know, driving the whole thing. I need, you know, I'd like to hear from you, because you may have picked up things completely, you know, different to the sort of things that I've latched onto. But I just wondered, within, I think it's something we were talking about, Sarah, before, in terms of the huge amounts of, well, two things really. The first interesting point that you made to me yesterday was about where this NIH money actually derives from, that's driving all this tobacco research, which in turn is being swayed towards anti-tobacco harm reduction. Maybe you could explain that a bit more for our viewers.
Sure. So when the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act was signed into law in 2009, one of the provisions was that the new center, the Center for Tobacco Products, needed to be funded by something. So user fees are taken from American manufacturers for certain types of products and based on percentages of market share. So these user fees are what, that's the funding base of the Center for Tobacco Products. So it's actually a very, very wealthy center in the FDA. And then the CTP has taken some of those user fees and turned them into a research program, the biggest part of which is TCORs, or Tobacco Centers of Regulatory Science. So the first rounding of TCORs funding was, it created 14 Tobacco Centers of Regulatory Science. And that funding instrument was worth $273 million over 4 or 5 years. And the second round of TCORs funding was 9 centers, and it was $151 million. So that's nearly $500 million worth of research funding. And the CTP doesn't have the infrastructure to be able to evaluate grant proposals, so they collaborate with the NIH, and it's the NIH's infrastructure that evaluates and makes decisions on how the CTP's TCORs funding will be distributed. And the research questions that are funded are things that are important to the FDA in making you know, the decisions that they need to make, because it's, you know, evidence-based decision making that they're committed to. So, but what's interesting about that is that that money has originally derived from the industry. It is user fees from tobacco manufacturers in the US that's where that money has come from.
Right. So really, it's the value that still holds within the tobacco industry that is creating this huge pool of money that's being, and I can say this, washed through the NIH. You didn't say that, I'm going to say that. And finding its way to all the various universities and research institutes in the US.
This is new money. So the money that Brad was talking about is sort of money that's always been there, but this is a new sort of injection of research funding that has come online. I think the first TCORs began in 2013, so it's a relatively new but significant stream of funding.
Right, right. I suppose the other question really that sort of falls out from that, and this is my ignorance of tobacco science coming out here, is what else do we need to know about tobacco in terms of the the impacts on public health and all the rest of it? I mean, I remember when I was, well, still do, kind of work in the drugs field. There was a definition that if you fill a rat with cannabis, the result is another academic paper. I'm just wondering if there is all that's happening in tobacco science is just replication after replication after replication, because publication, the drive to publication, gets you yet another tranche of money. I think Brad made the point that if you think universities are all about teaching students, then forget it. It's all about what not only what you publish, but where you publish and all the rest of it, which at one level might seem hugely cynical. But I just wonder about what tobacco science, where it's at outside of just trying to find the bad news about new products.
Well, from our perspective, we need to scientifically substantiate that the products that we're developing are indeed less risky than cigarettes. So we need to look at, so for every new product, we'll look at basic chemistry of the aerosol, and where we can, we try and publish that. Toxicology is an evolving field, so how you test for toxicological impact or biological impact of aerosols on cells, you can develop new methods. Something that is really important is having standardized methods for testing these products across the industry, not just the industry, but also academic researchers working in this area. Right. Some of the weaker science that you see published, it demonstrates a lack of understanding of the people who are designing those experiments. Right. And so having more standardized tests would be really helpful for the whole field. Right. And then I think some of the more complex research is around consumers and behaviors and understandings, and also looking at longer term population impacts. So that's kind of, the chemistry is very, very close. Chemistry and toxicology are kind of at the beginning of the process of substantiating the reduced risk nature of products, and then some of the other types of studies are a lot more complicated and are longer term. Right. So,
but beyond all the various stages of research that go into the study of new and innovative products, is there another whole sphere of tobacco science research going on out there that is, if you like, almost old school, is still trying to find the problems that there are and still trying to find new and bad things to say about smoking? I mean, I'm not expressing that very well, but is there because I'm just thinking this is just a huge amount of money that we've been talking, $500 million a year or something. It can't, or could it? Is it all going into the sort of science that we've been talking about? Surely not.
Well, no. I think it's looking at, so the FDA TCORS program is looking at a range of tobacco products and the new tobacco and nicotine products. So it isn't focused on, because we know a lot about tobacco and tobacco smoke.
Yeah.
So I think, and that $500 million is over quite a long period of time, say 2009 to 2022. So it's 10 years, but it's still an important injection of money, because money brings in new researchers and brings in. It changes what a research community looks like.
Okay. I'm going to come to you quickly to ask you a question that actually feeds also into the whole next subject of why do people use nicotine. Are you an addict?
Yeah, good question.
And what do you understand by that? Very quickly, because we're going to come back to this. I mean, Do your hackles rise at the idea that somebody could say, "Oh, you're just a bloody nicotine addict"?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'd often call it dependence rather than addiction. But as Chris Snowden said earlier, you know, what's the problem with being addicted to something if it's not harming yourself? How many people quite proudly say they're addicted to chocolate, or you know, or I can't get by without my first cup of coffee in the day, and no one looks down their nose at them.
So therefore, I stand guilty on both counts. There you go. Yeah.
So no one seems to think that anything untoward to that. So they shouldn't really with nicotine. It's just a mild drug, just like caffeine is. So
right. Okay. I'm going to wrap it up there because Man's waving his hands at me. So when Man waves hands at me, it means we have to. I think people can now go and watch the GFN'5s, and if we're very lucky, there may be some lunch left.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, and we'll come back later. Okay.